Welcome back. I'm Caitlin Henriksen, Health Educator for Sexual Violence Prevention here at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. If you haven't checked out our last video on the basics of interpersonal violence, I highly recommend you check that out for some background information. In this video, we're going to start looking at the basics of bystander intervention. Now, traditionally, when we've looked at violence prevention, we tend to focus on either the victim or the perpetrator. And while I obviously value education and do think that it's important to get as much education as you can, so there is some value in these approaches, there are also some issues. First, when we look at only the victim, it's really easy to fall down that slippery slope of victim blaming. And the bottom line is that no matter what the victim was doing, wearing, drinking, etc., no one deserves to be a victim of interpersonal violence, and the violence isn't their fault. Now, on the other hand, there's the perpetrator, and focusing only on them is problematic because many people aren't going to identify themselves as a perpetrator, even if their behaviors are unhealthy or abusive. They're able to rationalize them, and a lot of times this is due to different cultural norms or the belief that this behavior is acceptable. To change these norms, we all have a role to play in violence prevention, and this is where bystander intervention comes into play. So what is a bystander, or who are bystanders? Bystanders are just individuals who are present before, during, or after a harm has taken place. And I'm intentionally using the word harm because, as we talked about in the last video, there is a huge continuum of these behaviors. And on one end of the continuum, these behaviors aren't illegal or even necessarily against policy. However, there is still a harm that's taken place, and so it's important for us to try and prevent them. So bystanders can be passive or active. Passive bystanders observe the harmful behavior or are there before or after, but they don't do anything about it. Now, you may think by not doing anything, you can't be doing any harm. But what message do you think that sends the person being harmed? That nobody cares? That there's no point in saying anything? That this behavior is perfectly acceptable? No one's going to help. What about the person doing the harm? That this is okay to keep doing. If no one's doing anything, it must be acceptable behavior. Now, like I just mentioned, this harm is on a continuum. It could be something like a sexist joke or a comment, and you may think there's no point in intervening because it's really not that big of a deal. However, this is still harmful to the person experiencing it, and it can help foster those unhealthy cultural norms. So instead of being passive bystanders, we can all take on the responsibility of being active bystanders in situations where harm has occurred or is possible, by intervening before, during, or after these situations. Now, these situations could occur anywhere. It could be on campus, in a residence hall, or in a classroom. It could be off campus, at a restaurant, or a bar, or an apartment. It could even take place online. The environment and the type of harm occurring are going to determine how you can intervene safely. So it's really important for us to take into account our own personal barriers as well as the environment on how we can best intervene. In our next video, we're going to start unpacking some of those personal barriers to intervening.